And we are live. Hello, Raphael. Hello, Joe.
Hello, stars.
What do you mean? You're the superstar. What are you talking about?
I know I'm on the way down. You guys are on the way up.
No. We are right next to each other in the lap race, I think. Anyhow, thank you, Joe, for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to see you and spend time with you. I think I'm going to be really lucky and see you next week as well.
Shockingly, yeah.
I
it's
know.
An easy trip for me, which is 2 hours from here in New Hampshire to get down to Boston. So looking forward to it. Always
yeah, so we always say, I always break this my own rule of we're never going to say anything to date the episode, but we are going to be at WCRI together. It's one of my favorite conferences. So Pretty exciting. So Joe, you have been our guest before. Raphael and I have gotten, this is the second year we've done this. We have our first episode that kicks off the season is one where we identify 10 issues that we're going to try to focus on for the year and frame our conversation. So right away, when we built that list, I thought of you in two areas, and the one of them is a bonus issue. So we're going to talk about economics and how what's going on economically speaking affects our little world here in workers' compensation. And then we're going to save a little time to talk about our favorite topic, the upcoming presidential election this year.
I'm not sure it's favorite, but it is a topic.
It's very entertaining, that's for sure.
Yep.
All right, well, let's, so just since you've been a guest before, we're not going to go over some of the things we've done in the past, but I think everybody knows who you are. But for our guests, tell everybody where you're joining us today.
We are in New Hampshire in the winter. So there used to be winters in New Hampshire, but kind of what passes for winter, we're still here. And in the summer, we live in the Finger Lakes up in New York in a little tiny town called Skennealis. So we're broadcasting from our 1795 farmhouse.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And then everybody knows Raphael and I are in Tampa, and that's about to change. I'm in the midst of a moving my house down to Panama. So depending on where I am and when it is, I'll be joining you from Tampa or Panama. But today we're in Tampa.
Yeah. Or some other place around the country. Who knows?
That's true. All right. So it is an election year, so we're going to get to that a little bit later. But Joe, one of the things I always enjoy having you explain, because you're so good at it, is breaking things down. There's a lot going on with the economy. Depending on who you are and where you are and a few other things, you look at things a little bit differently. But you have a really good knack for breaking things down, specifically how they relate to our industry and workers' compensation. So I'm just going to hand it over to you and let you go in terms of what's happening, how does it affect the comp industry, and what do we need to be paying attention to?
Okay, so, geez Louise, that's a gigantic topic. So I'm going to throw my own contribution in here, which is what's going on in Washington or not going on really has a significant impact in workers' compensation. So just a couple things. One, the government's slated to shut down, I believe, March 8th if the House of Representatives doesn't pass a bill, and they don't show any evidence as of today that they're going to make that happen. Hopefully they will. But what's sort of lost in the whole process of that is every year CMS is required by law to change the physician fee schedule for Medicare. And they usually end up reducing the amount physicians get paid. And the reason they do that is they have a strict budget and they have to meet it. So they say, okay, all these services, we're going to reduce your pay by X. Well, Congress always overturns it and says, no, we're going to increase it by a point or a point and a quarter or what have you. Well, this year, Congress hasn't done anything, including fixing that. So what's happening to Medicare fee schedules is for physicians, they've declined, which obviously a lot of fee schedules in workers' comp for provider services are based on Medicare CMS. So that's a whole nother boat show of problems. So, that's sort of one of the things. The other is that what's happening in Washington in terms of the budget and things shutting down really does impact from a regulatory perspective what's going to happen at OSHA, what's going to happen with CMS, what's going to happen with Medicare, Medicaid, bunch of issues there. And then finally, because Medicaid re-enrollment is really dropped off in a number of states, there's somewhere north of 10 million people have now been kicked off of Medicaid, that's going to impact workers' comp as well, because a lot of those people were in states that really didn't expand Medicaid. And therefore, facilities who were getting actually paid to treat Medicaid patients are now not going to get paid to treat them. And they're going to be looking to find somewhere else, some other pocketbook that they can take that money out of to pay for the uncompensated care. So just a few quick examples of things that are happening. So from a sort of macro perspective, I am no economist, thank goodness. My prediction capabilities are probably just as good as theirs, which is not a high bar. So I sort of look at a number of things. And one of the things that affects workers' comp, obviously, is wages. Well, wage increases have really outpaced inflation over the last 9 months by a significant amount. So a lot of folks were justifiably complaining that, food costs have gone up. I'll get on that in a second. Other things have gone up, but wages haven't kept up. Well, the data clearly indicates that average weekly wages over the last 9 months or so have actually significantly outpaced inflation. So we've earned back almost everything that inflation sucked away from us. But when you dig down into inflation, it's running somewhere in a 2.5% to 3% range, depending on how you look at it. And if you torture numbers long enough, they'll say whatever you want them to say.
Right.
So people say, "Oh my God, inflation is 3.7%." Well, that's only if you take out some things and put in some others. And other people will say, "Well, inflation's below 2%." Well, that's again only if you take out some things and put in others. So the generally accepted numbers, which don't include such long-term things as rent, mortgages, et cetera, are in the middle 2%, 2.5% range. So one of the other things that's really encouraging is the latest survey of business owners, and they survey them every month to look at, and I wrote about this in the blog, and they survey business owners to say, what do you think is going to happen to inflation? They've predicted it would be around 2% for the next 12 months. So do they know? No. But what they're thinking is it's going to be around 2%. So therefore, I, business owner, don't have to increase my prices. I, business owner, don't have the ability to increase prices because inflation's not going up. And I, business owner, know that I can invest in something and that I don't have to worry about what inflation's going to do to that investment. On the food issue, which people justifiably get royally pissed off about, I dug into that in some detail. And what's interesting is when you look at Pepsi, Coke, Kraft, ConAgra, huge food company, Tyson Foods, Cal-Maine, which is one of the biggest producers of eggs, their profits have gone through the roof during the last 2 years. Just a couple of quick stats here. Cal-Maine, one of the biggest egg producers in the country. Remember last year we were like, oh my God, eggs are like $2 million a dozen or something.
Right.
Their profits went up 718% in the third quarter of 23. 718%. So I'm thinking of that $4, like $5 of that $4 was going towards their profits. Well, Pepsi, prices were up 17% in the third quarter last year, profits up 20%. Coke, profits up 14%. Chipotle, prices are up 15%, profits were up 26%. Kraft Foods, $6 billion profit, prices were up 15% last year. ConAgra, profits up 60%. Tyson Foods, profits doubled. They were up 100%. So when you think about inflation, it's like, oh, you got to fix inflation. Well, yeah, that's because these companies are taking advantage of everybody saying, hey, prices are going up, to jack up their prices so that they can create more profit. So this whole discussion about inflation and who's to blame and who isn't. And let's be clear, the impact any president has on inflation is insignificantly tiny.
Exactly. Yeah.
But for some reason, presidents get blamed for inflation and they get complimented when the economy does well. It's sort of like, I jumped up and down and cheered and the White Sox scored a home run. So therefore I should get all the credit for scoring a home run when I had nothing to do with it. The White Sox don't score many home runs, so maybe that is my responsibility. So it's when you think about these things, don't just take the first thing that you hear and say, oh, this is a problem or this is great or whatnot. You got to dig in a little bit deeper.
Let's unpack that a little bit for a second. Thank you for sharing the stats that you shared. What can we do about that? I mean, you're saying, I agree with you. It really drives me nuts when everybody says, oh, everything's going to hell in a handbasket because of that President Joe Biden. Right?
Well, the economy is actually doing really well.
Yeah.
So if you compare how the U.S. is doing to all the other developed countries, man, it is great here.
Yeah.
Germany's going to have flat growth. Our GDP growth is going to be over probably about 3% this year. That's really good.
Right.
Not inflationary, but it means there's a lot of jobs being created. That's a lot of stuff is being bought. Consumers are doing fairly well. So it's like the president and Congress has very little to do with the economy in most cases, except when there's something like COVID comes along, because if we don't keep money flowing in this economy, we're going to end up in a deep recession. That's when Congress, to their credit, President Trump and Congress at that point passed bills which threw a bunch of money at the problem, which prevented us from diving into a deep recession, which would have been terrible.
Right.
So, yeah.
But I mean, what can we do? So you mentioned all these companies who are making record profits. What is there to do about that? They're not going to stop doing that anytime soon.
Don't drink Coke. Don't drink Pepsi. Don't go to Chipotle. Don't eat craft stuff. Go to your local place and buy from local farmers if you have those. Go to Aldi's. It's like, when I came home with some groceries the other day, my wife found out that I had bought something that was way too expensive. She had me go back and return it and buy an alternate brand that was a lot less expensive. Wait a minute, I got to go. In New Hampshire, grocery stores aren't that close. It's like, so I got to drive all the way back there, do this to save like, I don't know, $6. No, honey, that's the way we do things here. That's our lesson here. You can't do that. So I'm a better shopper now than I was a couple days ago. So there's really nothing you can do about that. If your kids want Pepsi or your kids want Coke, you're sort of stuck with that. It's just sort of recognize and realize what the real drivers are and be aware of what's happening in the news. And folks who are like Tyson Chicken, okay, the prices obviously went up. That's why they doubled their profits. Good for them. Okay, buy the store brand. A chicken is a chicken.
Right. Well, okay, so we can get to that in another episode because I agree with you. If people were more mindful of the things that they spent their money on, I reference a lot of times in my childhood, I remember the big tuna boycott because, we were not happy with how the tuna was being caught and it was killing dolphins, and therefore people boycotted tuna, and it worked. But things don't happen like that much anymore. All right, so I interrupted you. You go ahead with your whatever you're going to talk about next.
So a couple of the things that I think are really positive. So Black workers make less than white workers. Well, we're at an all-time high in terms of African-American population. Average weekly wages is now about 83% of the average weekly wage for white people, which A, sucks, but B, is a lot better than it was even back in the 19s, like 17, 18, 19, 2017, 2018, 2019, when it was down about 75%. So that is a strong positive. What's also interesting is that the percent of the working age population that is working is about 62% for we folks who identify as white, and is higher for Black people. First time that's occurred. So Black people are working, a higher percentage of them are working than white people, which is kind of an interesting statistic. So, so even when you look at, this is a problem, or this is a problem, A, the economy is doing well, B, inflation's under control, C, wages are really taking over, and D, people who were, formerly disadvantaged are doing better than they were.
That's good. That's all good stuff. That's all good news. Ralph, do you have a question you'd like to interject here?
So, Joe, almost the same kind of statistics, right? With Hispanic or Latino populations, we seem to have a greater percentage of that population working, and income is also up. So it's been an amazing statistically to watch that growth in both the Black and the Hispanic population sort of slowly but surely getting up too. So what do you credit that to? Like, what's happening on the ground that's pushing that forward, or it's allowing that to happen?
So I'm just going to go out on a limb here because I always like to cite data and statistics. So the white population is probably older than the people of color population. So part of that is, I'm 65. Part of that is we're getting older, and therefore there's fewer of us working. However, that is the working age population that they base that statistic on. But even within that working age population, the older you are, the less likely it is that you're working full time. So I think a part of it is simply age. I think a part of it is also there's through different efforts, there's certainly efforts to inject more people into the workforce. You're seeing disproportionately people of color work in lower wage jobs, which is getting better, but that's still where it is. Those wages have increased significantly. So, for example, the dollar store in Lebanon here was paying $10 an hour. They just announced a couple of weeks ago they're paying $17 an hour now. Why? They can't find anybody to work. So, if you're a lower wage worker, no matter how you identify, you're going to be making more money. And because disproportionately people of color are in those lower wage jobs, I think that's what's also happening. And then, fundamentally, if you're say, I don't want to work for $10 an hour because it doesn't make any sense to do that, I'll go babysit or something. $17 an hour is a whole different story. It's almost twice as much. So I think wages increasing has actually gotten more people in the Hispanic, African American communities to say, okay, this makes some sense. I can A, afford childcare, and B, afford to do this.
Good.
You're right on the money, Joe, when it comes to the younger, both Black and Hispanic population. I mean, significantly younger. Right, where white population, 50 something is the average. It's in the 30s, for example, for Hispanics. So it really is. I mean, as you watch it and see it, it is overwhelming to know that the grand majority of that population is in its working age as compared to the other populations that are not, right? So immediately that kind of begins to explain it or jumps out you as a possibility for an explanation of why those numbers are growing so nicely in that regard. Yeah.
The interesting thing about that is, so obviously those are jobs that may have higher frequency in the workers' comp world, not necessarily severity. So are there different ways that Hispanic people, Black folks, Asian Americans, what have you, interact with insurance, or do they have different trust factors or different financial ways of saving, spending, using financial mechanisms? Workers' comp role, I think, would be well positioned to better understand that, to make sure that they can meet the needs of those folks who are increasingly working, and be prepared to engage with them. One of the challenges you have with Hispanic workers in the Southwest is a lot of them are very suspicious of medical care.
Right.
A lot of African American workers in the South are very suspicious of medical care for very good reason. So you got to be aware of that and understand that and be empathetic about that if you have an injured worker and you're trying to help them navigate the health system. They're coming at it from a different perspective, and you need to understand that perspective to be able to ensure that they get the care that they need.
Sure.
Joe, I don't see a lot of studies about, for example, our Black workers in comp or Hispanic workers in comp in the details as compared to the white population, right? Why is that? I mean, is it missing, or am I just not seeing it or finding it? Why haven't we gone there? Because it seems like historically it's not been here, and there hasn't been a huge rise in the number, of studies, at either higher learning institutions or the groups out there that have picked up some of the detail of that.
So that's a great question, and the short answer is I have no idea. I know that there's been evaluations of populations that are disproportionately Hispanic in terms of working in ag or extractive industries and the heat consequences of that. The other thing that, quite frankly, bothers me a bit is people who identify as Black or Hispanic. We don't have any way to scientifically categorize people. There just isn't. In fact, when you look at genetic variation among people who identify as white, it is broader than the genetic variation between people who identify as Black and people who identify as white. So, by the way, I'm like 1% North African, so I don't know. 6% Ashkenazi Jewish. Am I Jewish? I don't know. So the thing that bothers me about that is, like, if somebody identifies as Black, that's great, but what does that mean? Yeah. So it's my anthropology training. I have a tough time getting my head around that. But to your point, the reality is that Hispanic populations, I think that the evaluation of them is more of an industry type of thing than not. Black workers, I don't know. Interesting question. I'm up at WCRI next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to look at that. All right, so let's bring it back to comp. Some of the I know you said you're not an economist, I get that, but you do a lot of research, you follow a lot of trends and statistics and things. You're always or frequently talking about facility costs in workers' compensation. How does any of this stuff that we're talking about in terms of inflation and all those things, does that impact facility costs, or is that, let's talk about that.
Yeah, it absolutely does. So wages, for example, there's research indicates somewhere north of 80,000 nurses will be exiting the workforce in the next 5 to 10 years. We have family members who are nurses, and they cannot conceive of ever engaging in patient care anymore because that job is just awful. Working in a hospital, it's awful. So they're doing remote patient care and management, administration, et cetera. So they're going to have to pay more money, they being facilities providers, et cetera, to get clinical staff to work in those facilities, because ultimately they're going to have to do that. So up here in the upper valley of New Hampshire on the Connecticut River, the large health system here, Dartmouth-Hitchcock, huge population of travel nurses, travel clinicians, and they pay them a boatload of money. They're going to have to increase prices to do that. Dartmouth-Hitchcock is actually not well managed financially, and it's going to lose a ton of money this year, just like it lost a ton of money last year. So when you think about the impact of this, okay, experienced staff are leaving. We have to pay travel people typically 50 to 100% more than we're paying this local person, plus a stipend, plus. Okay, we're going to have to raise our prices. Well, CMS hasn't increased prices that they're paying hospitals either, because of Congress's inability to get its head out of its nether regions. So this is getting more and more and more problematic. And then if you're in a state that hasn't expanded Medicaid, it's like Florida, Texas, et cetera, it gets even more problematic, which means that these facilities have to go someplace else to get their revenue. When you look at rural facilities, there was a study out by Becker's that indicated a significant portion, I forget the specifics, but somewhere over 20% of rural healthcare facilities are in danger of closing or significant financial problems. So as the Inflation Reduction Act happens and more people are working in these high frequency, high severity things, building transmission lines for electrics, for hydro and wind and solar, putting in huge solar farms, or geothermal in some areas, et cetera. Those people, when they get hurt, they really get hurt. And then there's no rural healthcare around them. So you got to transport them to some place. And then it's in a state that hasn't expanded Medicaid. So that's why I saw a bill 2 weeks ago for $590,000 from a hospital in Texas and that's what they got paid for this, for somebody who'd been injured in a energy job. So that's not terribly unusual. Texas hasn't expanded Medicaid, has a very high percentage of people without health insurance. They're getting care somewhere, and they gotta pay for it.
Yeah.
So, but the other piece about facility care is, one of the things that's happened is, it's not just facilities have gone up, it's a drug costs have really gone down. They've gone down about 40% total spend in workers' comp on drugs over the last decade or so. And that's a remarkable achievement on the part of insurance companies, employers, pharmacy benefit managers, companies, et cetera. So what that's done is that's actually mitigated the increase of facility costs significantly. But I think that's bottomed out. The last survey we did last year indicated that drug costs looked like they had flattened out. They had increased just a little bit. So if that's true, then facility costs are going to take more and more of a bite. We haven't seen evidence of that yet because frequency is declining, but I would say that that's probably going to happen in the future.
So you're making me realize I did miss the boat. We should have made you say what it is that you do, because you do have health strategy associates. You are still doing these regular surveys. With the survey that just concluded, what was the biggest pain point with respect to opioids and medications? So
the good thing about workers' comp, unlike pretty much every other payer, is that they recognize this opioid is a huge issue because of indemnity payments and disability duration, et cetera. So they really jumped on it. It took some a long time, but they got to it. Some states Montana's problematic, but Louisiana's got their own set of issues. But most states are doing fairly well. But what's happened now is they've sort of expanded all of their potential ways of addressing chronic pain, which is what opioids are for. So what's happening is they're now relying more on physical therapy, which makes a ton of sense. Virtual reality. I work for a company, Applied VR, that actually has a FDA authorized treatment for chronic pain, non-invasive. It's a VR thing. Other companies are also involved in that space. What's great is that the industry is really open to those things. It's the solution for chronic pain is all of the above. Okay, if you need a service animal, if you want to go to yoga, if you want to join a gym, if you want to go to whatever, extra physical therapy, anything, sure, we'll do that if we can see that that's helping you, that's helping A, impact pain, and A1, improve your functionality so you can get back to work. So workers' comp, generally speaking, has opened up a lot more to, we'll be more creative if that's what people need to recover from these things, which is great.
Awesome. Boy, we've jumped all over the place this morning. Ralph, before we move on to my topic that I really want to get to, any other questions on economy or anything to do with that?
I do. Joe, you always keep great numbers. Comp is a tiny, tiny speck, right, of the overall cost in medical. Give us those numbers so that folks know what we're talking about here.
So workers' comp medical spend is about $31 billion a year. And U.S. medical spend, depending on how you count it and what is in it, is about, it's over $4 trillion. Right. So we're less than 1% of U.S. medical spend. So I appreciate you asking the question. It's like in workers' comp, regulators and other people think that, oh, we'll just pass this law and people will do it. It's like, no, that's 1% of the 2% of the average hospital's revenue is workers' comp. It's like, they're not going to change anything to do for workers' comp. Doctor's offices, unless you're a Cairo or something that does a lot of workers' comp, you're going to see one patient a week, maybe a month, the most. They're going to do anything different? Absolutely not. Thanks for that reminder.
No, I always quote you on those numbers because, right, we all assume we're a big part of this. Like, no, we're not really. In the grand scheme of things, we're a really tiny component. When you start looking, for example, at Medicare, with 65 million folks there, last year we spent 1.3 trillion on Medicare alone. You said it already, Medicaid. I mean, we had 94 million folks on Medicaid last year. This, because of COVID shutting it down, re-signing up again, we've lost about 10 to 15 million folks around the country. So we're down from that, but we still spent, another almost $900 billion on that. So between the two, we're spending over 2 trillion out of the, four that's out there on medical. Those are the big engines that we ought to be paying attention to. And you've said it here already. If Congress reduces prices on those and our comp fee schedules are based on those items, boy, oh boy, are we going to see turmoil down here in our neck of the woods, aren't we?
That's a great observation, and I couldn't agree more. Especially in states like Massachusetts, which have extremely low fee schedules, that's highly problematic. Other states that don't peg their fee schedule precisely to Medicare are going to be a little bit better off. But there's also the cost shifting piece, which is, okay, my Medicare population revenue has decreased. I got to figure out some way to make that better. And that's not happening at the physician practitioner level. That's happening at the coding level. That's happening at the business manager level. That's happening at the contracting level. They're just like, yeah, workers' comp comes in, we're going to get everything we possibly can out of this.
All right. One question I want to go back to before moving on is you mentioned that you have family that are in the nursing profession and that it's just they're not looking to go back to the clinic setting to do nursing. And you said it's awful. Why is it awful?
So for the first couple months of COVID, everybody was a hero, our healthcare heroes. They'd be handing out signs and thanking them and applauding as they drove away. And then all of a sudden it was COVID doesn't exist and COVID's not real and this is all terrible and blah, blah, blah. And so you went from being a hero or heroine to this person who was trying to tell you that you need, before you could come into the ER, you had to do a drug test. I'm sorry, a COVID test.
COVID test, yeah.
And it's like, well, and then you'd ask if they were vaccinated, and they say, no, I don't believe in that. Okay, so you can't come into the ER because we don't know if you have COVID, and then they get yelled at. And there's physical abuse, there's all that stuff. And this is not just limited to people that I know very well. It's rampant throughout the country. The abuse that these people took, and it was extremely frustrating to them because the nurses and doctors knew what could be done to contain this. Masks, really good research I've written about in the blog shows that masks made a difference.
Yep.
And vaccinations made a huge difference. And there was so much disinformation. It's like, why are we even paying attention to this? It's just like people are dying because of this misinformation.
Are you saying over the COVID period, there was a loss of respect for people in the medical field? Is that what it is?
I think on the part of some people, yes, there was definitely, I don't say a lack of, I don't know if it's lack of respect, but they just discounted what they said. But then they, when they got COVID, they wanted Paxlovid, which, is a drug that was involved, that some ancient fetal bloodline was involved in, and they didn't want the COVID vaccine because that was tested against the fetal bloodline, but they wanted Paxlovid.
I know. All right. All right. So that's a good segue. That is a good segue to go into what I've been dying to talk about the whole time. It is an election year.
Indeed, it is.
So you and I have had long conversations. Well, maybe not too long, but conversations about this in the past. And I'm not going to go down any particular path other than what do you see ahead? So I'm just going to put it out there. Everybody that's talked to me in the recent past knows I'm heading out of the country. This has been in the works for a long time, but honestly, one of the reasons we decided to go now is because I personally don't want to be in the thick of, I live in Florida. I live in Tampa, Florida. And you really can't talk politics to anybody unless you know exactly, like Raphael and I talk about it quite often and our families do. But outside of people that you know really well, you just don't talk about it because you just don't know what you're going to get. And I don't like living I don't like living that way. I don't like living when you can't talk and have reasonable conversations about what's happening. So.
Yeah. So
it's going to be better this time, worse? What's ahead?
So talk about, well, first off, the polls don't mean anything this early. Mm-hmm. The second thing, national polls don't mean anything because it comes down to somewhere between 3 and 7 swing states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona, maybe Georgia, maybe not. It also comes down to getting out the vote, and people tend to vote more because they're angry at the other party than they're excited about their party. So there's all these different factors. And as my wife keeps telling me, don't obsess over things you can't control, figure out things you can control and do that. The other is when you look at, so under the Biden administration, regulation of healthcare providers, of big companies, et cetera, has dramatically changed. So I'm on the board of a Medicaid, Medicare, HMO health plan. We're relatively small. Our revenues are less than $3 billion a year, mostly in one state. But we are more tightly regulated now, which makes it, quite frankly, difficult for us to do business. But what CMS is doing is they're really trying to focus in on the indicators of delivering great care. In the prior administration, it was easier for us because we didn't have to worry a lot about CMS breathing down our necks. But they weren't really focused on some of the things that I would argue are more about patient care. Are we doing the right thing? So there's, one hand taketh, the other hand giveth, et cetera. So when you look at it, okay, if Trump wins, then there's going to be a lot less regulation. There's going to be a lot less concern about monopolistic power. Biden administration's prevented a lot of mergers and acquisitions because of market consolidation. so I would see that those things would occur. The other thing that is a little bit scary to me is part of the platform of the Trump administration. People are talking about coming in is that they want to put a 10% tax on goods coming in from outside the country. Oh my God, would that be inflationary? Oh my God. So we get so much stuff from Canada, so much stuff from Mexico, so much stuff from China, and all of a sudden, I mean, all the cheap stuff you buy in those big box stores comes from China, and that's where a lot of people shop. So you're going to go in there and tell people you're going to pay 10% more. That's going to be very inflationary, and which is going to potentially drive us into. So it's like, what are these people thinking? It just doesn't make sense. So on the other hand, if that it does look increasingly because the House of Representatives can't seem to get their act together, that and the special elections have more tilted towards Democrats, that there's a better chance that Democrats take over the House. Again, polls don't mean anything this early, but you look at trends. Democrats have a chance to take over the House and possibly maintain control of the Senate. And oh my goodness, would that be an interesting political landscape? You have a Donald Trump as president, and then you have a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. And the Supreme Court, Lord knows what those crazies are going to do. So, it's the old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. That would be the most interesting of interesting times. You may have a lot of house guests knocking your door in Panama.
Hey, honey, we need a bigger place. I don't know. I can't get past the fact that we're actually doing this again, it's going to be Biden and Trump. I can't get past that, which again, that's one of the reasons I'm exiting. But I'm going to vote. Ralph?
I just did a project for a talk for some folks in Montana, the self-insured folks up there. And what's really not recognized is how many jobs the Inflation Reduction Act is going to produce. And they have it on a state-by-state basis. Montana population is 1.3 million. There's going to be 4,111 jobs created in Montana. These are really high-paying, like six-figure jobs doing all kinds of expensive stuff and all that economic stuff. Because Texas, 85,000 jobs. Florida, 75,000. California, like 176,000. And these are really solid jobs doing things that are going to really help the economy, fixing bridges and infrastructure, all that stuff. So when we think about sort of where the country is going, I think the future is actually pretty bright. We've got to start sort of dwelling on stuff that we don't have. First world problems like, oh, my plane was delayed. That's terrible. Yeah, well, you don't live in Kyiv. Nobody's trying to bomb you or kill your kids.
Right.
So
Right.
I think we kind of need to take a step back and say, let's not catastrophize what's going on here. Life is actually pretty good. It's a pretty good time to be an American. And we have it really good, and we need to understand that, and we need to also understand that a lot of other people in other places don't. And how we're complaining about an economy and everything else, all the other issues around here is sort of head scratching to me. I don't understand that.
Ralph?
Joe, let's bring some of that politics over to comp. First, let's talk about how's comp doing? I mean, from an economic standpoint, seems to be smooth sailing, seems to be, numbers are still very nice, seems to be the one consistent area of insurance that's profitable, and it's been so now for a long while. Am I missing the boat there at all?
No, you nailed it. Not only are comp rates coming down, claim frequency dropping, medical expenses are flat, pretty much flat. They're less than inflation. Yeah. What's also happening is profits have been really high. You're talking about an underwriting margin of 12 to 15% on top of whatever investment income. And there's $14 billion in excess reserves as of last year. And those are just profits that have not been booked yet. So yeah, workers, this is like the best industry. What's interesting in the P&C world is, auto, GL, some of these other lines, it's getting more expensive and they're losing money in that. Comp is subsidizing those for multi-line carriers. Mm-hmm. That's why they're keeping this thing going. So employers who have a high comp exposure, they're paying a lot of money so that people's private auto and PIP and other stuff is going to be cheap. You nailed it.
Joe, for example, these catastrophic events, weather events, right? We all tend to think it's only comp and it's only comp insurance money, but you just untap that, right? The reality of it is all of these other lines, including comp, including, right, for example, it's all the same company out there, that it gets underwritten and priced differently and accordingly, of course. But at the end of the day, if those areas are losing billions, right, is that going to end up having an effect on our comp lines and what we have seen, the positive that we've seen?
I would say so. So what there's the financial wizards at these insurance companies and excess carriers and reinsurers and all that will figure out how to take those profits from workers' comp and offset losses. So overall, whether it's ABC or XYZ company, overall they're going to be profitable, but they've lost business here and they've gained business here. Just like any other business, whether it's construction or retail or energy, what have you, they got some lost leaders. And for right now, workers' comp for the first time ever is really helping to subsidize those other industries that aren't doing well. So, for example, the private property or homeowners insurance in Florida.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's a total train wreck.
It really is.
Yeah. California, fire insurance in California, rates are going through the roof for obvious reasons. Flood insurance in California, not outside of the government program, those rates are going up as well. So yeah, I would expect that they're going to try to keep comp rates and hide profits in excess reserves as long as possible, and then use those reserves to pad the other lines.
Joe, around the country every year, right, I try to pay attention to the NCCI rates that are recommended for each of the states. And it seems you get a few states where rates might be going a little up, but generally rates coming down in most states.
Yeah.
As compared to rates, from the prior year. And it seems like that's the continuing. So I scratch my head going, how can rates be coming down, seemingly a carrier may be making less money, but yet our profits are up, right? How does that happen? Talk to folks out there about the mathematics of that.
So I'll start off saying I do not know, and I'm not sure anybody knows. I mean, the financial people know because it's all numbers to them, but then what you're asking is what's underlying that, what's driving the numbers. So I've long believed that the actual situation here is really driven by what I call the opioid hangover, which is, 10, 12, 15 years ago, 35% of drug costs, 40% of drug costs were opioids. And people on opioids aren't driving the school bus. They're not operating the machine press. They're not going to work, period. Disability duration extends. You've got all the attendant medical expenses, all the drug costs. So it really increased disability duration, increased the medical expenses dramatically, increased drug costs, et cetera. So, actuaries and workers' comp lost a boatload of money back then because the actuaries are, driving the car, looking in the rearview mirror, and they're looking behind them and say, it's not that bad. They're not seeing that these opioid losses are going up and up and up, and that these people are never going to go back to work. People that they thought with their injury, they'll be back to work in X days. No, back strain, took OxyContin, they're never coming back to work. So the opposite has happened now. So what's happened is the actuaries are still driving their car down the road, looking in the rearview mirror. What they see in the rearview mirror is that, those costs for those claims were higher than they are today because we've been able to take a lot of unnecessary opioids out of the market. It's down to it's less than 20% of drug costs are opioids now, which is a remarkable turnaround.
It really is.
So they're basing their projections on what cost will be in the future on data that is wrong because it's looking at something that was true back then, but is inherently not true going forward. So that's going to level out at some point. I think probably fairly soon, maybe for this year, maybe at the latest next year, 2025. And I think things are going to level out at that point because we'll have done almost as much as we possibly can, and we just have incremental gains in terms of reducing unnecessary opioid use and impacting chronic pain. So I have one client we worked with for a number of years on this. is a very large payer. Their population of people with really significant chronic pain is down below 5,000, it's a very large entity with just a ton of coverage, and that's a remarkable result. It was back in the tens of thousands 5-6 years ago.
Yeah. It speaks volumes, Joe, right, for the incredible work that our folks are doing day in and day out and returning, improving medically, returning them back to work, employers opening up, right, to those individuals that even have a disability. I mean, it seems like the stuff that all of us have been talking about and preaching about has caught on. People are doing it, and the fantastic work shows in these numbers that continue to amaze me every year, the profitability of our industry.
It certainly is. And, kudos to the workers' comp industry, much maligned for a variety of good reasons, but it has really led all payers in terms of addressing the opioid disaster.
Love it.
Well, I don't know how we got back into this lane, because my grand scheme was to end laughing hysterically at we talked about politics and my voice did not raise. I did not drop the F-bomb, and
there's still time.
I was just going to say, wait.
We are way over time. So we always say this, Joe. We say it with a lot of our guests, but you are really no exception. We could go for hours with you. It's always fascinating to talk to you.
And, I'm sure my wife would prefer that, but, I have chores to do, so.
Well, thank you for spending some time with us today. We really, really appreciate it. Tell us something fun other than going to Boston soon. What are you up to? What's something fun that's going on the farm?
So I mentor this young man who lives down the way, and he's a good kid. He's a total knucklehead because he's 13, and he's just a total knucklehead. But we're going to go to my alma mater, Syracuse University, next weekend, and we're going to watch Syracuse men's lacrosse team play lacrosse, which he's a lacrosse player here, and it's going to expose him to that. So that should be a lot of fun. I don't think he's quite prepared for how loud I am, and he's probably going to be totally mortified that this old guy is going to be yelling. He said, only positive things. Sometimes I do tell the officials that I have a disagreement with something they say in the most polite terms possible. So I'm looking forward to that. However, it is a 5.5-hour ride both ways. So I told him to make sure he has plenty of movies on his phone, because I'm not listening to his music for 11 hours.
What music does he listen to?
Oh, geez. Anything from hip hop, laced profanity stuff to Christian rock to
stuff that us old fogies won't listen to.
Oh man, I just want to listen to the Allman Brothers and
Bob Dylan.
Some old blues is great. I'm not a Taylor Swift fan. She's from Marketwood. No,
Joe, come on, Joe. How can you not be a Swiftie? Come on, Joe. Get with the program. Come on now.
Oh man. My family are all Swifties. I listen to her stuff. It's like, oh God, this is like more. She's a wonderful human being, a terrific, great dancer, makes all her own clothes, blah blah blah. But I think she's wonderful.
At least look how far we've come. Look at how Madonna was, and look at Taylor Swift. I mean, too.
Lady Gaga, and but wait a minute, Janis Joplin.
All right. On that note, we should end. So good stuff. Thank you so much for joining us, Joe. Always a pleasure. Until later, hasta luego.
Later, Joe. Thank you.